By our very own Kamal Georges. Kamal followed this story. He was out at the scene and continues to follow the developments as it relates to that story and so much more. The Express newspaper today and also the Guardian, the front page of the Guardian, hunt for killers, 8 murders over the weekend. Are we a country under siege? And I'm going to look at it simply as to what's happening within our families. The situation in Trumakak was sparked, the flames of that fire were ignited by a family feud between 2 brothers. Also over the weekend, a young lady was stabbed to death at the hands of a male relative. We're going to also, I think the Express has 8 killed over the holiday weekend, headless body burnt and found in Arangwes. Accused head to court today hoping for peace and love in TNT. Women die at the hands of lovers on set. Daryl Joseph. Daryl, are we a nation under siege? What's happening to the families in Trinidad and Tobago? Why is there so much anger and it's resulting in these situations? Okay.
First of all, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, and season's greetings, despite whatever might be going on out there, to you and, of course, to the watching public. Sad, very sad. Yes, we are a nation under siege. We have, in fact, been under siege for some time. I think what we're seeing now, looking at this in the context of the statement of emergency period. I think what we're seeing now is that a lot of what we had hoped may have been resolved, properly dealt with, diffused and so on, was in fact just put under the shelf or hid under the rug, under the carpet for a period of time. And now that everybody is free to roam and free to do as they want, you are seeing something that resembles a return to what we had prior to that. And I had reserved judgment on the whole state of emergency period until after, when we can now begin to evaluate what happened during that period and what the long-term effects.
Now that we are assessing the long-term effects, would you say that the SOE has failed?
In the context of the long-term effects. But you see, you have to be kind of careful about it because the state now, one of the early issues with the state of emergency, I don't want to go down too much into this, but one of the early issues was what was the intent behind it, okay? And it was very clear, or at least it was clear in some quarters, that it was an attempt to deal with an imminent threat, okay? So if you are looking strictly at it in terms of dealing with an imminent threat, I suppose the imminent threat has been dealt with. So in that context, you might say, well, yes, it was a success. But if you're looking at it in the context of a beginning or a springboard to not only slow down the rate of serious crimes, but to really get a grip and a handle on it, then you have to ask yourself questions, because it doesn't look like that right now.
These family situations, why is there so much anger?
Okay. As we've said time and time again, the level of anger, the level of frustration that people in certain sectors feel has been building for some time. And there are various theories that deal with that. One of the theories that I like to quote very often is from Abraham Maslow, which talks about needs, okay? Which talks about basic needs that all human beings need, and it talks about the higher needs. When you have your basic needs taken care of, the things that you will aspire towards to feel fulfilled and to feel satisfied with life, all right? And it's a pyramid structure, and at the bottom of the pyramid we have very basic things: food, water, shelter, clothing, and so on, okay? And the theory goes on to say that if those things are not dealt with, if you don't have those things, if you don't have food, you don't have shelter, you don't have clothing, you are going to be living with a level of frustration and a level of anger that is going to be intolerable. And what we're seeing now, I think, is this spillover of that.
Women die at the hands of lovers. Women have been betrayed in many ways by the men who profess to love them. And 2012 was no different. For the past year, several women were killed at the hands of their lovers, some by men who supposedly love them, while others at the hands of random strangers. Yes. The Express has a detailed account of every woman that was killed as a result of a domestic situation. Yeah.
You know what? We have a lot of... I always say we don't do enough important polls in this country. We poll to see what's the popularity of this minister or that minister and, you know, what people feel about things like that. But we don't poll things like people's attitudes towards important things. For example, we need to understand the attitude that the average male Trinbagonian has towards a female person, okay? And while, as in any other society, there'll be a wide variance, there'll be some men who, you know, are very respectful and see women as equals and treat them accordingly. I think, and I'm saying I think because I don't have the evidence in front of me, all right? But I think we have a large number of male members of our society who have poor attitudes towards women, okay? And that plays itself off in situations where men and women are in relationships and the man has this sense of ownership over the woman. And he also has a sense that, you know, if she were to not be at his beck and call and not to be right there for him at every turn, that it is a gross insult to his person. As though she were to have no opinion of her own, as though she were, you know, to just have to go along with everything that he wants and everything that he says. So when a woman shows any kind of opposition to someone who is like that, who has that level of disrespect for a woman, it is interpreted, as I said, as a gross insult to the individual, a gross insult to the person. And his retaliation then in dealing with this person who has disrespected him and who has treated him, you know, with the worst possible kind of contempt, his reaction is very often a violent one.
And I know in a number of topics, A Nation Under Siege, we're looking at family life. A number of families have been torn apart as a result of violent acts, whether it be murder. There's a story of a burned body being found in a Rangwes, the possibility that the police have already contacted a family that they believe would get some closure as a result of this case. But this is a young child. I can't even say coming back, returning to a level of normalcy, but the ability to cope with this event. Are we seeing a number of broken persons in society, and also in what is considered to be the crime hotspot areas in our country, where a number of children are now fatherless or motherless as a result of murders and gang activity?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to understand something about trauma. If something happens to my neighbor, it doesn't only affect my neighbor, it affects me as well. If I see it on television, if I read it in the newspapers, it also affects me. So there's a spillover effect that one trauma has upon the other, It's like a really horrible kind of domino effect. So now you're going to find that the whole nation, and we've said this before, right? The whole nation is walking around, every individual is walking around with a certain level of trauma, a certain level of, in many cases, dysfunction. Okay, as a result of witnessing and being aware of and seeing the details of these gruesome acts that have been committed. So we really are a nation in need of healing.
How do we begin this healing, Daryl? If we're at the end of 2011, how would you describe this year?
Okay, it's been a really, really terrible year as far as looking at it in the context of crime and so on. It's been a really, really horrible year. I mean, I can't begin to count the amount of gruesome things that we've seen, okay? But in terms of healing, you know, very often we look for I don't know if it's because we all grew up watching too many movies or TV shows or whatever, but we always look for a silver bullet kind of approach to things, meaning that we figure, okay, people are committing heinous crimes, so resume hanging, all right? And once we resume hanging, that's going to deal with it. That'll be okay. No. And then you're going to have the activists who will say, no, we need to have social programs for fathers and for families and so on, and do that.
Social programs are obviously not working.
Right, and nobody will say, well, do that, okay? Don't hang, don't do this. And then, of course, you'll have the others who will say something in between, all right? But what I find doesn't happen often enough is that we're not looking at this thing from a multi-pronged approach. There are certain measures that you need to do that is going to deal with the immediate problem, all right? And, you know, we actually saw some of that happening during the state of emergency, okay? But there are measures that you need to put in place for the medium and for the longer term. And these measures have to not just be done in isolated instances, but it has to be coordinated, all right? So if it is a way of discouraging young men from, excuse me, if we are discouraging young men in the community from fighting with one another, then when something occurs, when a dispute occurs, it needs to be dealt with very quickly, all right, and very clearly. At the primary school and at the Montessori level, if you see two little children haggling over a pen or a car or a toy or whatever, that has to be dealt with very quickly and very, very seriously as well. I'm not saying that you punish each other, but the children have to get a very clear idea in their minds from that age. This is not the way to resolve disputes.
So we do have to take a very short break. When we come back, we're going to continue this discussion. Do stay with us. Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Hema Ramkisoon, and it's Wednesday, the 28th of December. Countdown to 2012. How has 2011 been to us as a nation? This year, we saw a number of highs and a number of lows. The major story, the declaration of a state of emergency. The Christmas weekend was there. It's a time to give praise, to rejoice, to know that we are blessed. However, Hunt for Killers, the front page of the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian. Don't forget to pick up your copy today as police probe 8 murders. 8 murders over the weekend. That's supposed to be a religious, despite all the festivities, all the fetting, all the rum, all the family, all the limes. It is a religious holiday. And we are now grappling with the fact that 8 families have been torn apart. Tara, we're looking at a number of issues, but how do we really heal this nation?
All right. We have a very, very bad habit of being extremely reactive to things in this country. All right. So, for example, we have 8 gruesome murders over the weekend, so there might be a scramble to put this in place or put that in place to deal with it. All right. And we're going to offer the victims counseling. Okay. And we're going to do a whole bunch of things in reaction to what has happened. Okay. That needs to stop. That needs to stop. There was a whole, I remember this, you could look it up, research it. I remember there was a whole initiative about a year and a half ago to establish in the first phase 4 trauma clinics throughout the country where you would have had seasoned, qualified professionals who deal with trauma. And I'll talk a little bit about that, all right? Who are qualified and who have experience in dealing with trauma, to be open and accessible to victims of serious crime and to those people who might be living in situations where they experience violence and so on a regular basis, all right? Because there's this perception that, in order to access these services, you have to be rich or something like that. So, you can't just go to the hospital or go to a clinic the way you can go for an ear infection or a headache or, a cut or something like that. We need to utilize, we need to harness and utilize all of the resources that we have in this country, because we do have resources for dealing with this kind of thing, okay? But we need to harness and utilize them properly in a coordinated fashion. We need to have a common vision, a common mind as to exactly what we want for the country, not just in terms of buildings and infrastructure and water and energy and so on, but in terms of the values, the ideals, the type of behavior that we want citizens of the country to have. And we need to get everybody who is involved in doing this kind of work on board, as I said, to have a united common voice towards doing it. Okay? A
united common voice.
Yeah.
I just want to bring this back to the family level. I know, because our phone lines are going to be open in a couple minutes. For the women out there who are in relationships, what are some of the warning signs that they do not end up being the headlines of a paper? Okay.
What do you usually see? Now, people who are about to commit acts of abuse don't announce it beforehand, all right? So you do have to know what some of the warning signs are. And one of the most common warning signs is jealousy, okay? Or a sense of suspicion